Nous recommençons pour cette dernière
We're going
session.
to start off again with our
Alors,
last
avant de
conversation.
commencer,
Before we
quelques
start,
petites informations
I
et
have
remerciements.
some
D'abord,
information to
nous
give you
sommes
and
très
some
contents,
thank yous as well. First of all,
avec
we're
A.M.I.
very
de l'opération streaming.
pleased with the streaming
On a vu
operation
hier
with
soir
the
que
A.M.I.
plus de 150
We saw
personnes sont allées
more than
sur la
150
conférence
people have
en
been
live ou en podcast,
listening to
puisque
the
c'est enregistré.
streaming either live or as
Ça
a
veut dire
podcast.
que,
So that means
la
that
plus des deux tiers des
150 people. So that means in
personnes
two-thirds of the people attending this conference have been doing so online. I think that's a great thing because people are right around the world. So that's it's a great thing.
en apparence éventuellement modeste à une
So although it might seem quite a modest event, it does have a big worldwide resonance. That's thanks to our people here behind us called Urban Prod, the technicians allowing that to happen, and also the camera operators as well. I'd like to thank them for their excellent work. And in addition, they're going to produce a whole compilation of everything that's been done, which will give us a nice deliverable to give us our friends in the EU. So thank you everybody for that, all those technical people.
Alors, merci
For
aussi,
getting
bien sûr,
allowing the streaming to take place, and I'd also like to thank everybody who's working behind the scenes, especially the A.M.I. team, who've been doing great work to produce this event, with Nathalie, who's in charge of the production, and all of her colleagues, and my colleagues, of course, because whether it's for the Musiques festival and also for this conference, they've done a great job. Well done there. I'd also like to thank the personnel of the Villa Méditerranée for their kindness and the professionalism. The Sandonaires, the lighting people, everybody's been looking after us here. And of course, I'd like to thank the partners from the region and everybody supporting this event, which is just a stepping stone to future events. So we now move on to our last conversation. Vincent Carry and Daba, who are both of them in charge of festivals. And apart from their festival activity, also do all sorts of other kinds of work, which is very complicated in different territories. They export their activities as well. And of course the idea is to maintain respect for the artist and to develop the industry, and also to maintain freedom of speech. I think it's very important to end our conference with the contribution from these two people. We'll start with Vincent, first of all. Vincent, I think your mic's working, I hope, yes? Arty, Farty is one of his achievements, and Sonores as well in Lyon. So Vincent, is the question of markets. Can we invent new cultural markets in a fair, sustainable, autonomous mode? In addition to the markets that are proposed to us by the worldwide media industry, is it possible? Is it just a hopeless dream? Does it work? First of all, thank you Ferdinand for inviting me. Perhaps you'd just give a quick presentation of everything you do with Arty Farty and you and your friends, who are many of them here with us today. What do you do exactly? Well, I'll answer the question later on. Arty Farty does a lot of things. We do the Nuits Sonores festival in Lyon for the last 14 years. 14th edition will start in a few weeks, from 4th to 8th of May. We have organised Nuits Sonores in other territories, often as a one-shot event in lots of different countries, in Zurich, Barcelona, Yokohama, Shanghai, Carthage, Tunisia, Berlin and many other places as well. And another event which takes place every year in Tangiers in Morocco. Our 4th edition is being prepared now, and it will take place in October. We also organise a forum called the European Lab, which started 5 years ago in Lyon, which is a way of thinking about the future of culture. I'll talk a bit more about that later on. It's a very ambitious project, but I think it's something that something we need to talk about in a very broad sense. We also do a bit of management. We have a business model that is based on the fact that we sell our expertise and know-how to other organizations, whether they're private or public sector, or so this enables us to monetize our know-how. So that's part of our independent business model. That's the key word, I think, is independence or autonomy. And we've created a little ecosystem of organizations, a kind of toolkit, which started with the development of a cultural venue called the Sucre in Lyon, a very beautiful 1920s building, a former sugar factory, hence the name. And it's a venue for the biennial of contemporary art. And also, starting in 2000, as the venue for the Nuits Sonores. We love this building, and we have developed an independent cultural venue on the roof, which we have funded by ourselves. So this is a completely self-financing project without any public money, leading to the creation of a new organization called Culture Next. And then we have a little booking agency and tour management agency in Paris called A.M.I, which we created with a historic tour organizer called Alias. This agency is specialized in certain types of artists in electronic music, which we like very much, which we think are particularly elegant and unusual, and who we like working with. And apart from that, we have other projects. We are heading a project, a European project called We Are Europe. Our experience hasn't been as painful as others we've heard about from working with Europe. I think we are lucky that our interlocutors in Brussels are fairly clear about our situation and are very competent. This is a project we'll talk about. It's called We Are Europe, which brings together 8 European organizations in 8 territories, who all started with a festival and who developed their own toolkits around the festival, and who have created forums for discussion, and who are trying to think in detail about what they're trying to do. And then I have a difficulty with the word incubator from the very beginning this morning, to be honest. I find that a difficult word to use. When I hear this word, it bothers me. It's difficult to find a replacement, but since we don't have any other word, we prefer to talk about a hub or a skills or energy platform. In any case, we're going to create a venue. We're at the building stage at the moment. We've taken over a private mansion that was very dilapidated in a neighborhood of Lyon, and we're going to set up 25 organizations will be housed there, and we'll be trying to help them have a long-term future and to consolidate their activities. And apart from that, we'll also try to find links between all these different players, so that we have a jigsaw puzzle or a cooking recipe, so that in the same venue we have all the ingredients for a very strong action. So now I'm going to answer your question that you asked at the beginning. The question is really concerns independence or autonomy. This is the most important and difficult thing. Today we are in a world where we are shared or torn between 2 stories. We've heard about the opposition between creation and industry. One thing is the collapse of the institutional model, particularly in France and Europe. We are in a situation where the cultural policies and the historic institutional structure no longer meets our needs. And this is particularly clear in the area of music, and this is a problem that is becoming worse. Should we accept this weakening? Do you think it's a definite disappearance or a transition? I think it's a transition. I don't want to plagiarize our friends from Action Europe. I think they're right when they say it's a transition. It's a good punchline. They're right to say it's a transition. The idea is to say that there are institutions who no longer meet the needs and problems of today. This is because of the inappropriateness of cultural policy to contemporary demands, but even worse, in my opinion, this has an impact on the democratic space. in France, for example, I was amazed by the presentation by our friend from Racine earlier. Maybe he's too optimistic about the Ministry of Culture in France, I think, perhaps, but certainly we have a more stable here than in Morocco. That's certainly true, but nevertheless, there is quite a big schism. And on the other hand, of course, I'm talking about budget and assignment and cultural policy. Where should we put money and what should be the objective? What are the aims of a cultural policy today? For example, the strategy of the emblematic venue of cultural policy, something that still continues to exist, which I think is absolutely ridiculous, with huge investment being put into that. And we are well placed to talk about that here today. Whereas everything today indicates that we should be doing the opposite. I think there's a huge gap in terms of the lucidity by the policymakers. Another thing is that everybody seems to be very well qualified to talk about the empire of evil, in other words, industrial and cultural capitalism, which is entering into the world of art, having conquered the media space, having bought out a number of important players in the media world. They've now turned their attention to the world of culture. We're familiar with them. These big industrial companies have a playground now that is being so weakened in the institutional sense that it is quite easy for them to offer money to buy out a theatre or a classical music venue in Paris, or a festival in Angers, or a big museum, or a chateau in Versailles, for example. Yes. All this is rather worrying, because the idea of public service and the general interest, or the commons, which we've been talking about today, is less essential in the mind of these industrialists. And finally, to answer your question about independence, we try to have a particular position that is independent. This means that we build up a business model that is independent, that can include public money to some extent, because it's part of our ecosystem. It only represents 10%. We have 45 employees, permanent employees at the moment, and business activity, sorry to use that word. Our business is about 6 or 7 million euros per year, and we do this with about only 7 or 8% that is from public money. So that's what I call independence. And also, our resources are very fragmented, which gives us independence as well. We get revenue from the audience, from companies. We've talked about CSR already, also from the local authorities, and also our capacity to be entrepreneurs and to be entrepreneurial, to monetize our know-how and to create added value in a number of different areas. And we developed a number of tools to do that. Another essential point is that in order to exist between these two points, with the weakening of the institutional model and the conquering of culture by capitalism, to exist in this independent space, you have to be quite strong. You can't do it if you remain on the margins. Is there a threshold effect? In other words, can a small structure do that, or do you have to have 40 or 50 employees? There are two key criteria. First of all, it depends on the toolkit you have, how responsive you are, and how you can respond to projects very quickly. And you have to have the right human resources to do that. And it's also a question of your strategy of alliances between independent stakeholders. That's what I see in an area, in this kind of conference, where there's a lot of solidarity between the independent cultural players, not only moral solidarity, but also active, real solidarity with a common commitment to projects. This is what we do in our European project. We Are Europe, that we are involved in with our colleagues. This is what we do in the Foreign Lab as well. These shared strategies are very important. It's not necessary to recreate skills where they already exist, but rather to be an aggregator or a consolidator of skills and to go and find them where they already exist, and the intelligence as well, to be able to work on projects together. The most important thing is the end result.
Donner un petit avis en tout cas sur la question, c'est que les artistes, je suis d'accord avec toi.
I agree with you. Artists have complete freedom, and they can do nothing if they like. And they may not succeed in what they do. We are just here to give them the tools to enable cultural projects to exist and for artists to be able to work, for us to be able to continue showing them, for them to be able to continue performing on stage and in other areas of broadcasting and dissemination in a rather violent environment. Haven't heard much today about something which I think is very important, that there's no other generation since cultural policy has existed has had to confront such difficult context to promote these cultural projects. And at the same time, we have a democratic responsibility and responsibility as citizens as well. And at the same time, we have to try to create jobs in the independent sector. It seems completely beyond reach sometimes. We've made a very clear choice, which is only to have long-term permanent employees, no short-term contracts. All of government subsidized contracts then become long-term contracts. All of our employees have long-term contracts. This is a big challenge. It's better to have a constructive approach rather than to work in the short term. So you have to be very strong to be able to do that. You can't work alone, and you can't be too fragile. So the independent market exists then. You're not condemned to choose. Well, it's up to each person to judge. If Violaine, since she is here, she's one of the important programmers for Nuits, Sonores. If you think what she does is too commercial, you can tell her at the end of the conference. But I think that the audience is 130,000 people attend our events. For the Le Souk, we have 115,000 people per year for the cultural part of the venue. I think we have very high artistic demands that we make. We may be even intransigent in our demands. And so in pop culture, we have very independent artists working for us, and it's a niche market. It's true, though. It's a very positive thing. This is encouraging. We'll now hand over to Daba. You come from a rather different context, but not that much really, because you've also had to deal with this issue of the market as well, especially in Africa. The music for market for music is changing all the time. Is there a independent market possible for music in Africa, or does it always have to go through the complications of an international market with a big boss deciding what's going to be exported or not? Is that possible or not in Africa? You'll tell us this, I'm sure, but Africa Fête in Dakar is one of your events, and there are other things you can talk about as well. So first of all, explain what Africa Fête is, perhaps first of all. Thank you, Ferdinand. I'll try to talk about Africa Fête. You know it better than I do, really. I think there are people in the room who know about Africa Fête as well. For the rest of you, I'll try and explain it to you. Africa Fête is a music label created in 1978 by a very well-known actor. It's a label that has supported a lot of artists who've become famous, such as Youssou N'Dour, Salif Keita, and Ismaël Lô, and Bob Marley. So this, in 1994, they decided to return to Africa and to work from Africa. So Mamadou, through his activities from the very beginning, realized that this was an important sector, and so he wanted to organize training actions in the Dakar and capacity building to support the structuring of the sector in Senegal. So through our activities, we also organize tours and workshops. We have worked with A.M.I. on a project which took place in Senegal, Marseille and Abidjan. As part of our activities, we have also organized the Africat Festival in Senegal, which is a festival of music, which in addition to the concerts also organizes meetings in order to think together about issues in the sector. For example, the mobility of artists. This was a big problem. It is the crucial problem, which is still the case today. So it was on the basis of this mobility project that we worked more to export the music. This Africa Fête Festival is organized in Africa, in Dakar, in Senegal, and also in other regions, because we realized that nothing was being done in the regions. Everything was focused on the capital. And so there was a very strong demand from the regions who also wanted to have these artists from the regions who wanted to be able to perform in Dakar. And so it wasn't possible for everybody to do this, so we had to go to the regions. And so it became a decentralized festival, and every year people wait for us in the different regions of Senegal for the versions of Africa Fête, so that all of these young artists are able to participate, even if it's not in the capital. So gradually, the activities of the festival are increasing. This is with Mario Conte in the room here. We organized the Africa Fête Festival here in Marseille, which has been going for 12 years. It'll be the 12th edition here in Marseille from the 10th to the 18th of June this year. In 2013, we got the support from the EU as part of its ACP culture program, which enabled us to make this a traveling festival. This meant that we traveled to Benin, Cameroon, around France and Senegal, with several different editions and participation from many different artists and cultural operators. So I was talking to BEMAL. BEMAL is a network of operators which started in 2007, following the discussions and meetings held in the Africa Fête Festival, which today brings together 10 different countries, cultural operators who are very active in their respective countries. They organize tours of artists and training, and help to structure these sectors in Senegal and in other countries of the region. And we were able to participate in to be present in the European markets, but we realized that there was weak participation of African music and African players. So we asked ourselves, why is this the case? And so what happened? So because there was a problem with the quality of the work, and a problem of the mobility and visas, and also a problem with finance. There is a real need, because of all of these players need to be exported. All of them want to be able to travel. When you talk about traveling, you're also often talking about Europe and US, but they never talk about Africa. And we believe that African artists should, first of all, become well known in their own continent before they go elsewhere. This is really important. That's why we together thought about how we could set up a local markets. Today, this is a very new thing in Africa. It's not very well known. So we're trying to see whether this can be accepted by the local population and by the cultural players who are in the different markets. And luckily, we were accepted by the countries we visited in these different local and national markets and regional markets. And this has made it possible to set up the CIMA, the International Market for African Music, which began in 2013 with the support of the ACP culture from the EU. And we've held 3 editions, one in Yaoundé, another one in Senegal, and another one in 2015 in Ouagadougou. What have we learned from this? It was a very positive experience. It was greatly appreciated, but also there was great local involvement. The problem remains, however, we've been talking about independence or autonomy today. Yes, we've been able to create these markets because we have support from Europe, which has enabled us to get people to travel with all this budget and the finance that is required to do that. We have local support, but it's not sufficient. To date, there's a real need. We have financial problems and we have travel problems even within Africa, especially within Africa, I would say. Yes, maybe even more than elsewhere within Africa. So we want to develop these markets in Africa, and we have all these barriers that we have to think about together, how we can overcome these barriers so this African market can develop. The local market, when we talk about Massa, which has just finished, which started in 1992 in Abidjan. Which had to stop because of the war, and then it started up again for a few years. The Massa is supported by the Ivorian government and by the Francophone community. In the Cap Verde, what happens there? It's the Ministry of Culture in Cap Verde who does that. If we look at the visa for music, it has the partners, it also has the king who provides that funding. If we don't have this local involvement, you can't talk about independence and autonomy. We can hope to be autonomous in the future, but in the future, whether it's a distant future or the near future, we don't know. But we also have to think about these African attitudes, which don't consider the cultural things as being something with a value, think it should be free. When you go to a concert at the Africa Fête festival, you go to Sagre concert, it's your cousin who starts to say, "Can I have a free ticket?" And for my girlfriend too, and for her friend and his friend, and they all want to get in free. So it means that nobody buys any tickets. And there's little brother and their grandmother, etc., etc. This is what happens. And if you don't do this to people, then they think you're against them. Adele was talking earlier about the value of culture from the very beginning in our schools, so that from their childhood, children will say, culture is something that belongs to me too. It's part of my existence. And so this child has to say, today, I want to go to a concert or a play, and to make sure they're prepared to pay for it with their... I don't know how to do that. How can we change these attitudes? But I think there's something that has to be done from the very early stage, so that children become used to saying that the culture, it belongs to me. It's just like the bottle of water that I buy to drink. It's something that is part of me and that I need. And so I'll spend my 500 CFA francs to buy what I need. This is something we need to think about if we're talking about independence. I'm sorry, this is what we're looking for every day. It's very difficult to start over again every year. Okay, we have to fill in a form, you have to find money from wherever you can. It's very tiring. It's exhausting. But we have to do it, because unfortunately there's no other solution. We need to have the local commitment from local institutions to be able to move forward. For the time being, this is the case. Until one day, we haven't lost hope. We are still hopeful, and we want to be independent. I always talk a lot. I'll try and stop talking for a little bit now, so we can move on to the questions. Daba, one question. I participated 2 years ago in 2014 in this conference on financing of culture organized by the A.M.I in Ouagadougou, which is the West African Monetary Institute. There were 8 countries from the A.M.I region, including Senegal, who were there, and there were a lot of proposals not concerning funding, because A.M.I, as its name indicates, isn't a Ministry of Culture, it's people from the economists and bankers. I thought it was very interesting, the proposals that were made. They were quite innovative. I would like to know whether you've seen any results of this in the field, because these people were talking about making the local cultural markets independent in West Africa, bearing in mind that despite what you say, the benefits brought to these countries by cultural production are huge. Compared to their GDP, it's much more impressive than it is here in Europe. So there is a reality of cultural markets in Africa that does exist, and we have the impression it's not the Africans that control it. But there is a real market, it does exist. You can't say it's impossible because there's no market. That's not true. There is a market for culture in Africa. The question is, who is controlling that market? Does the A.M.I help you get control of your markets? Because in the discussions with A.M.I, the question of the possibilities for artists and cultural producers to travel within the 8 countries of the A.M.I in West Africa came up and again. Everyone kept saying, yes, of course, we have to label people to travel. Did that have any impact or not? I can confirm today that between what people say and what the authorities or politicians say in the conferences and the actual implementation, there's a huge gap. Very little implementation, in fact. If you look at the case of Senegal, I've heard about this conference you mentioned, where there was Senegal that was represented and participated. First of all, we would have been interested to have the report from this meeting. As cultural players, perhaps the reports of this meeting have been published and were sent to certain people. As cultural players, officially, we have never been informed of the proceedings of this meeting. So there's a lot of talking going on, and each autumn we participate in these meetings with the ministry. Over the last year or so, they have understood that they really have to involve civil society in discussion. So that's a good thing. We can be thankful for that, because we need to be heard. And this is something we've achieved. The state is now involving us in the discussions. At least that enables us to know what's happening. If they don't enable us to get involved, and we can't say to them, hang on, stop. 3 weeks ago, or 5 years ago, or 3 years ago, you said you were going to do that, and you even signed something. You signed an agreement, or a head of agreement, said you were going to do something to do for the cultural sector, and what have you done since then? At least we now have this opportunity, and this is something we've gained, and we can congratulate ourselves for having done that. At least now we can speak out and make people more accountable for what they are supposed to do. And we also still have this barrier with the Ministry of Culture, who changes every 6 months or every year. This frequent changing of the Minister of Culture, it continues to be a huge barrier in Senegal. Yes, that happens in France as well.
So Vincent, do you have a relationship and influence on the economic authorities, and not cultural, of the city, or the... do you have a permanent dialogue with these people? Because we're in a very centralized country where the public intervention in the economy is quite important, whether at the regional, state, or city level. I'm talking about the culture, or the people of the Ministry of Culture. Is something happening in the Rhône-Alpes region to that effect? You talk with them? So we considered straight from the start, and I think we try to be as lucid as possible, that our commitment in the territory, or the dialogue we could have with all the actors on the territory, was essential to our survival, in fact, and that we had to find the modes, the modalities, and not only in terms of financing, because as I said, no, we're very independent. No, in terms of influence. Yes, firstly, we did a lot of lobbying work for culture and for what we believe in, and we did a lot of that lobbying before elected representatives, local authorities throughout the territory, and regarding, for example, we mentioned that earlier, with a view to the dissemination, attractiveness, and everything. It's something on which we're very much committed, and we've been so for the last 15 years. People listen to us now. We have become legitimate. We've conquered our legitimacy. We benefit from. We are. So we're committed in a certain number of things. I am a member of the board of Lyon, I think, which is the trademark, the brand for the attractiveness of the territory, brings together Chamber of Commerce, airports, universities. I represent the cultural role in this organization. It's surprising, maybe, because 10 years ago, it would have been the director of the opera or something like that. So it's quite encouraging. So we managed to win a few battles. And we also valued the territory in our activities. By definition, we created the storytelling of what we wanted the festival to be. It was in opposition with the pre-existing model, what I call at the time the first generation festivals, which often restricted their claims, territorial claims, to their brand name, so the Trans Musical of Rennes, the Franco Follies in La Rochelle, and so on. But some people call us the Nuits Sonores de Lyon, and we were in basements, and it wasn't in Lyon, and we didn't want. We wanted to call Nuits Sonores alone, the sound nights or something like that. So it was a running gag in our team for a long time, this name. But the model of the festival was a territorial claim where first generation festivals had a single site, a single location, or defined aesthetics. A big site, stage, tents, and things. No, we considered that the city was our site, and the space of this festival was the urban territory, the public space, its heritage, industrial heritage chiefly, and that was really what made our brand. And beyond that, how we mobilize the actors, very federative. There's 130 structures that take part in our festival, so it federates a lot, and the largest majority of the actors in the sector are involved in a way or another. There are programs which are precipitative. We mobilize cultural projects that can come from very small structures or even individuals. The circuit, which is the Thursday evening, we federate 13 sites throughout the city. We don't produce anything on that night. We just leave the space open for them. So I don't want to say too much, but it's a festival which was as such in its design, not in its marketing, but a sheer value of we were valuing the territory and all the actions we carried out after. I have an anecdote here, an example. Something that happened without us being proactive to that effect, but the Google advert this winter for Christmas is an advert that chose, without even asking us to talk about the sugar. So it's our cultural site, and there was one mail, I think. We were asked to have to send them a free of right photo, but. Yeah, it's something they use, so quite surprising, huh? And the subject was that everybody in Lyon were really flabbergasted. It is something really weird. But systematically, we've always been So there's this little thing in France is very symbolically we created carte blanche, which is the invitation in a given city around the planet. We've invited 13 cities up to now, and the 14th one will be Seoul, Korea. And we invited them in the first year, in 2003, we decided to invite Marseille. And it was a choice that was highly symbolical because it was a way to say, well, Paris, well, okay, so much for Paris. I think Paris, we were too much about that city. And for us, there's also this claim of independence with regard to Paris. It's a positive independence, I think, because the whole team, Culture Next and so on and so forth, we all love Paris. We have no problems with Paris, no, we don't have any problems with Paris, but we wanted to strongly indicate that we could have strong projects emerge outside Paris and a claim for our city, and that we tried to value internationally, because each time we did international projects with Violaine, Pierre-Marie and the whole team, we always set as an imperative to bring in our suitcases local talents, artists from Lyon. So I have an anecdote here, as some know, maybe others don't. I'm one of the founding members of the Friche de Belle de Mai in Marseille. And we arrived at the time when Méditerranée, where we are now, was being built. And at the time, it was the second operation, public development, urban development project in France, just after La Défense in Paris, just to give you an idea of the size. And since we were starting the Friche, we were invited to discuss with them, and they created an imaginary committee, they called it. And I attended a few times. It was quite interesting because we met with high repute urban planners who were under the impression that this imaginary committee would eventually transform, refocus this, reorient this Euro-Mediterranean project. Well, nothing happened, of course. And I think the committee met 3 times and then was stopped. So I'm very weary when you talk about this trendy activity, when you try to bring these people together and you don't necessarily follow what they say afterwards. You bring people together. Did you feel that you're used as a sort of like a caution or something like that they use you in a way? And for you also, because you have this tourism activity or in African countries, so you can be used as an alibi. Well, in the mindset of some politicians, yeah, maybe, but not that much, because I think we're lucky enough to have, I'll be honest here, I know that we were often critical when it comes to elected representatives, notably for the Ministry of Culture, but as far as local authorities in Lyon, we were very lucky to have quality people to talk to, elected representatives that understood our story, and there was a generation renewal, important generational renewal. So we are also the children of a change in policies. You must know that Lyon was governed by the right-wing party for practically a century, Édouard Herriot for 50 years. And when Gérard Collomb, a socialist, was elected as mayor of Lyon, there were municipal elections in 2001, and if you remember, the left-wing party had lost everywhere on authority except in 2 cities, that is Paris and Lyon. And it was a sociological indicator at the time of what the left-wing party was becoming. It's quite different to what we knew before. There was an evolution of the left-wing party. No comment. And so Delanoë in Paris beat the right, and Jacques Collomb in Lyon. So these are major surprises in this election. And this, in our sectors, was very positive. And it also led to the change of the people. So we saw people coming in, 25, 30 years of age, and this helped a lot, in big renewal on the political scene. And what helped us in our business model, that this generational renewal took place also in enterprises. All the enterprises of the territory. I remember when I started what kind word can I use here? When I did some PR work and tried to sell our promote our projects at enterprises to ask them to support our projects financially, well, 9 times out of 10 we were just thrown out, because of the commitment in classical music, contemporary art, so there was no room for us. Or opera, for example, they couldn't care less about what we could produce or what story we had to tell. Today it's totally different. 80% of the people, of decision makers in these places know exactly who we are, what we do, what we're talking about. So, and they know about us, and that's obviously very important. Daba, is Africa Fête an alibi for the Ministry of Cultures and the Mayor of Dakar? I think that today what is good to know is that Africa Fête is part of one of the greatest festivals in Senegal, and it's on the national agenda, cultural and touristic agenda of Senegal. So it's something that should be highlighted, and so it's a very strong recognition. And we can also say that Africa Fête today is considered in Senegal, compared to a few years before, we are involved in the reflections and the work of the Ministry of Culture, other ministries. We are involved in discussions who need a cultural point of view, and also through the grouping of associations that we brought together in Senegal. So we have quite a lot of networks, the network of producers, of artists. We all work together. And so this anchored us in the territory. And so we weigh more. And today the state has to negotiate with these new groups. And this is what we managed to do today successfully. So this networking and this sharing of experience, but also and chiefly this complicity that we have, that we've set up between producers, artists, diffusers, and so on and so forth, which led to the fact that today we are real stakeholders in the reflection process of the state. Thank you to both of you. We'll take questions now, the last questions. If anybody wants to take the floor, ask questions. If anybody. So it's the first conversation where the audience does not participate. I think this is an indicator that we are getting towards the end of our event. Some people know. Any questions? No? Yes, we have one question. Thank you, Colette. As you all know, and this is the topic of this roundtable, is this notion of durability, sustainability. I'd like to know, on both examples, besides the festival periods, what are your activities? How do you talked about added value? Obviously, it's very important, but what do you do? What kind of activities do you have over the territory outside the festival periods? And I think the notion of intermittent, that's a special system in France, the intermittent of artists. Or do you have full-time employees? How do you work? Do you have part-time employees? Well, briefly, it's very difficult to answer this question. I would say that what we do the year over, I think I did talk about that. We create a cultural place for this reason, because between 2 editions of Nuits, Sonores, we felt frustrated, for not being able to program artists, have actions over our territory. So at the beginning, we created a cycle of events that were called Sonores that lasted 6 years, and that was aimed at keeping our activity, our artistic space alive throughout the year. And so we did 100 events, and we stopped it strategically a year before we launched Le Sucre, the sugar in English, but it's Le Sucre. And so we stop and we announced that we would come back soon, and it was an old dream, and then we launched that, and there is the action we have with the artistic direction that we propose to a lot of people. And in fact, we're doing a lot of project incubation without claiming it. All this will be crystallized in Hotel 71 that will open in 2017. Construction work is undergoing now, and there's the activity we have with Gaieté Lyrique for 8 years. Gaieté Lyrique was opened 5 years ago, and it was there right from the start of the project. So this is an action that is continuous. As far as intermittence, I said that we don't have permittents. Well, that's permanent employees. There are a lot of part-time employees, the French intermittent system. We don't have any permanent employees that are false intermittents. Well, that's the whole system in France. It would take time to explain that. As far as the independence, cultural niches, how we can work on minority cultures. Actually, I was faced on politics with a view to a word that was. I was told many times that they said there's no more budget for new comers because the budgets are concentrated on what exists, and it's true that any elected representative in the culture ministry actually controls 4 or 5% of its budget maximum, because there is an institutional agreement aimed at giving money to the same people, existing structures. I had discussions with them, and they said, "Oh, you should support this emerging event. You know, it's worth it. These people are very relevant. They renew the cultural landscape. It's important to help them." And they always answered. I say that because a project like ours that would be that we would present today wouldn't get the support that we had at the time. So it's a wound that we have. So the reply I got, the answer I got was a word that local authorities know very well. We can't just distribute money and just. We can't scatter the money, you know. Scattering the money, we call that incubation all day, you know. But it's what we call seeding a territory, for example. Avoid necrosis and avoid staying among each other between older people for the decades to come. And this is very, very serious. And where the authorities have decided to concentrate their means, I think we've entered a period where I don't know if I can ideas. I don't know. I propose one idea is to revalorize and kill this notion of scattering money. You know, this is on the contrary, we need risks to be taken to invest on small projects with public money to better distribute the means, and this is absolutely obvious. To accept also the prototyping, to say that we need to take risks right up to the stage where you can fail. And this exists in the business world, the economic world, and in the cultural world it doesn't exist. And this is crazy. It should be the same. So, wait a minute. Just maybe a comment on this notion of scattering money, because we talk about word cleaning. I think we're pollinization that we should do based on small investments. The public expenditure is not only expenditures; it's investments and in sustainable goods. It's an investment. It's not about what do you do all year besides the period of the event. Well, maybe I summed up, before what we do at Africa Fête, but Ferdinand knows that at the start we have an association that is called Tringa, that organizes the Africa Fête Festival, and within the scope of its activity, we set up a cultural activity center, which is downtown, and proposes residences, rehearsal studios, and also theaters, because there weren't many showrooms that could welcome these young talents, so they give them an opportunity to express themselves. There was Cyrano, and you had to be Yunus Sundur to be programmed at Cyrano. And so Mamadou thought that it would be important to open this cultural center that unfortunately did not last for several reasons. It would be long to explain, but beyond the festival that is today our main activity in Senegal, we also organize residencies, artistic exchanges, we organize tours. I can no longer about management, but we also offer secretarial services for the artists. I don't know if it's part of the incubator activity, but we try to support artists through administrative work, accompany them in their demands for subsidies. We implemented through we implemented a website also that publishes music, and that is starting to gain importance. We also have training activities throughout the year, and beyond all this, we also have the Cola Association here in Marseille, that is the French representative of the Africa Fête, that does a lot of other activities and training, workshops. Cécile is here, and she can eventually compliment on what I said. And so we try to, I can tell you that we don't sleep at night. You know, we have a lot of activities throughout the year. Okay, well, I think we'll stop here. This will be the end of our 2-day conference. Thank you very much, both of you. I think we can give them a hand, go wild. You noted that all the speakers are very strong-tempered. I like that very much. I think we have to change people. We have to integrate the new generation, being hard-headed, and it's a good thing also. Okay, so a little exercise. Don't leave the room right now, because we need you, the people who were our keynote speakers. For each discussion, we'll go to one of those tables here in the back, and the idea is the next 30 minutes, we'll ask them to write up 3 recommendations on their topics. And for you, you're invited to go to the table of your choice and to eventually try to influence them on the recommendations. So after this, if I calculate, well, I think we'll have 18 or 19 recommendations, and this will be, well, the conclusion of this conference, to have 18 concrete recommendations on a bright future, thanks to our keynote speakers and you, the audience. So when you're done, you just place your recommendations on this table, and the last that will conclude, well, we just read the 18. We'll read the 18 recommendations. It will be the official conclusion of our conference. So thank you very much. I don't know where are the keynote speakers. Are they at the beach? It's not really nice outside, is it?